My daughter called me on a Sunday afternoon while I was trimming the hedges in my backyard. Her voice had that bright, rehearsed cheerfulness she used whenever she was about to disappoint me. "Dad," she said, "we've relocated to Denver. It happened kind of fast. We just forgot to mention it." I set down my shears. I stood in the grass for exactly 5 seconds, feeling the late afternoon sun on the back of my neck, processing the sheer weight of what she'd just tossed at me like it was nothing. A cross-country move, a husband, 2 children pulled out of school mid-semester, an entire household packed into a truck, and she'd forgotten to mention it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. I said, calm as still water, "All right, sweetheart, take care of yourself." I hung up, walked into my study, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I sent one email. It had an attachment my daughter didn't know existed. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from tonight, friend. And if you've ever had family try to play you for a fool, hit that like button right now, because you're going to want to remember you did. My name is Walter Kessler. I'm 68 years old. For 36 years, I ran an industrial equipment supply company out of a warehouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The kind of business nobody glamorizes in movies, forklifts and conveyor parts and steel fittings, but the kind of business that quietly makes a man wealthy if he's patient and he's careful. I built it from nothing after I got laid off from a steel mill at 26 years old with a wife, a baby, and $400 in a savings account. I understand inventory. I understand margins. I understand risk. And somewhere along the way, without ever noticing the warning signs blinking right in front of me, I forgot that the greatest risk to everything I'd built wasn't sitting in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was sitting across from me at my own dinner table, calling me dad and smiling. My daughter Vanessa is 34. Her husband Craig is 36. Those 5 words, we just forgot to mention it, rang through my kitchen like a struck bell, and long after I hung up the phone, I stood there listening to the echo. It wasn't an oversight. It was an insult wearing the costume of one. As I walked down the hallway toward my study, my mind dragged me backward. 9 months. To the evening Vanessa and Craig had sat across from me at this very table. Candles lit. A bottle of wine I'd been saving for something, opened without asking. Vanessa had reached for my hand, her eyes glassy in that practiced way. "We want to stay close to you, Dad," she'd said. "We want the girls to grow up down the street from their grandfather. But the house needs work. The foundation's cracked, the roof's shot, and the contractors want a small fortune." My late wife Eleanor had been gone 3 years by then. She'd always wanted this. Grandchildren nearby, Sunday dinners, a house full of noise again. Her absence had left a hole in me the size of a canyon, and Vanessa, whether she meant to or not, had learned exactly how to reach into it. I wrote the check that night. $1.8 million, an outrageous number for a roof and a foundation, but I had it, and they knew I had it. And I told myself I was building something permanent. I told myself I was finally giving Eleanor the family gathered close that she'd never gotten to see. Now my daughter was standing in some moving truck in Colorado, mentioning it like a scheduling conflict. I stepped into my study and shut the door. It's a small room, nothing fancy, just a heavy oak desk Eleanor bought me for our 20th anniversary. Walls lined with filing cabinets, and a bookshelf full of manuals I never look at anymore. Behind the 3rd row of binders, there's a floor safe I had installed myself 20 years back when I still did my own electrical work on weekends. I hadn't opened it in over a year. There'd been no reason to. Inside it, I kept the things that mattered most on paper. The deed to the warehouse property, the trust documents for my grandchildren's education fund, a notarized copy of that check I'd written Vanessa and Craig, and the one document that made my stomach drop the moment I remembered it existed, my healthcare power of attorney, granting Craig, of all people, the legal authority to make medical and financial decisions on my behalf if I was ever incapacitated. I'd signed it 2 years ago at Vanessa's gentle insistence, back when it seemed like nothing more than responsible planning. I knelt down, spun the dial, felt the tumblers click into place the way they always had. I pulled the door open. It was empty, not disturbed, not rifled through. Empty, wiped clean, like it had never held a single piece of paper in its life. I sat back on my heels in the quiet of that room and felt something cold spread slow through my chest. Nobody had that combination but me. Nobody had a key to that room but me. And yet, then I remembered. 3 weeks earlier, Craig had come by on a Tuesday, said he wanted to fix a squeaky hinge on my study door, told me to go relax and let him handle it. He used to do handyman work before the sales job. He knew what he was doing. I'd been in the kitchen for almost an hour while he worked. I'd thought nothing of it. I thought I was lucky to have a son-in-law who still wanted to do things for me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, so sharp and sudden in that silent room that I nearly dropped it. A text from my bank. Security alert. The mailing address associated with your primary accounts has been changed to a residence in Denver, Colorado. If you did not authorize this change, contact our fraud department immediately. I read it twice. Then a third time, just to be sure my eyes weren't playing tricks. They hadn't just taken my documents. They were rerouting my entire financial life across state lines. Quietly, methodically. The way you'd redirect a river so nobody downstream notices the water's gone until their well runs dry. I sat down at my desk. My daughter thought she was dealing with a lonely old widower who'd stopped paying close attention to anything but his garden and his football games. She thought she could pack a truck and vanish 1,000 miles away and I'd just nod and wish her well. She forgot who taught her how to read a balance sheet before she was 10 years old, sitting on my lap in this very warehouse office. I opened my laptop, and I began to think, clearly, coldly, the way I think when a shipment goes missing, and I need to trace exactly where the breakdown occurred. I sat with that banking alert glowing on my screen for a long while, feeling the shape of the last 6 months rearrange itself into something I finally recognized. All the little kindnesses I'd waved off as nothing. All the small, generous, watchful attentions I'd told myself I was lucky to receive at my age. It started after I threw my back out lifting a crate at the warehouse back in the spring. Vanessa had insisted on staying over to help, said Craig could handle the girls in the house for a while, said I shouldn't be alone while I recovered. She took over my kitchen. She took over my medications, lining up my blood pressure pills each morning in a little plastic case, and then, one evening, she'd added something extra to the case. "Just a vitamin, Dad," she'd said, sliding 2 small tablets across the counter with that same sweet, sad-eyed sincerity. "My friend's a nutritionist. It's supposed to help with memory as we get older. It can't hurt." I took them. Why would I question my own daughter, home to take care of her father, pregnant with worry over my health? Or so I believed. The weeks after that are hard for me to talk about, even now. A man who once ran 14 different supplier contracts in his head without a spreadsheet, started forgetting where I'd set my car keys down 30 seconds earlier. I'd stand in my own garage, staring at the door, unable to remember what I'd walked out there to get. My words would come out thick and slow sometimes in the evenings, like my tongue belonged to somebody else. I felt myself slipping, and I was terrified, genuinely terrified, that my mind was simply giving out on me the way Eleanor's father's had, in that same helpless, humiliating decline. And Vanessa was always right there for it. Always with her phone lifted at just the right angle whenever I fumbled a sentence or stood blinking in confusion in my own hallway. "Oh, Dad, you're too funny," she'd laugh, tapping her screen. "I'm just sending this to Craig. It's sweet how tired you get." It wasn't sweet. It wasn't a daughter's affection. It was evidence, patiently, methodically gathered, footage of a healthy man's mind appearing to unravel in real time. The realization hit me sitting right there at my desk, and it hit hard enough that I actually stood up out of my chair. I walked out of that study and down the hall to the kitchen, my legs moving before my brain had finished catching up to what my gut already knew. Sure enough, by the back door, 3 trash bags sat waiting for pickup, left behind in the rush of their sudden move. People running from something don't stop to take out their own garbage carefully. I tore into those bags right there in my socks, digging through spoiled food and junk mail and crumpled receipts, looking for anything, any proof, any thread I could pull. Near the bottom of the second bag I found it. A small crushed box, the kind vitamins come in, except there was no brand name printed anywhere on it, no dosage chart, no friendly cartoon leaf logo, just a string of letters and numbers stamped in plain black ink on a foil blister pack with 2 empty slots pressed out of it. I carried that box back to my study like it was made of glass. I sat down, opened a browser, and searched that code against a pharmaceutical reference database I still had login credentials for, from my years serving on a hospital supply board. The page loaded. I read it once. Then I read it again, because I didn't want the first reading to be true. It wasn't a memory supplement. It wasn't holistic anything. It was a heavily restricted sedative, the kind used in psychiatric facilities to manage patients in acute crisis. A drug that required multiple physician sign-offs to dispense legally in this state. Side effects listed in the clinical summary: stark and clean and clinical, short-term memory loss, slurred speech, impaired motor coordination, cognitive fog, easily mistaken for early-onset dementia. My own daughter had not been nursing me back to health. She had been quietly, deliberately dismantling my mind, one small white tablet at a time, right there in my own kitchen, while I thanked her for taking such good care of her old man. And Craig had sat across from me at dinner every night, watching it happen, saying nothing, doing nothing, because a father whose mind was crumbling was a father who couldn't fight back when the time came to strip away his rights and his assets, and hand them both over to his loving children instead. The videos on her phone weren't sentimental keepsakes. They were exhibits, building toward a future filing in a courtroom, a petition to have me declared incompetent, unable to manage my own affairs, requiring a guardian appointed by the court. And wouldn't it be convenient, wouldn't it be so natural, if that guardian were his own devoted daughter? I sat with that for a long moment, feeling the anger inside me stop burning hot and start settling into something colder and far more useful. I needed to know exactly what they'd taken and exactly when. I turned to the second monitor on my desk, the one wired into the security system I'd had installed at the warehouse years back and later extended to cover my house, back when a series of break-ins hit our neighborhood and I decided I'd rather spend the money once than worry twice. I logged in, pulled up the archive from the last 3 days. My cursor hovered over the footage from my study. The screen went black, then red. Lines of text I didn't recognize scrolled down the display faster than I could read them, and a single message appeared, bold and mocking. White letters on a dark field. Archive corrupted. Deletion complete. They'd wiped it. Somebody, Craig most likely, had hired somebody or bought some piece of software designed to scrub a hard drive clean and salt the earth behind it, making sure whatever they'd done in this house in the middle of the night would never surface as proof of anything. Craig always was clever that way. Give him a spreadsheet, a strategy, a way to squeeze value out of a bad situation, and he'd find it every time. But Craig had made one mistake, a mistake born of underestimating exactly who he was dealing with. Before I ever sold a single forklift part, before I ever signed a lease on that first warehouse, I spent 6 years working nights installing commercial security and surveillance systems for banks and jewelry stores across 3 counties. I didn't hire some contractor to bolt a camera above my garage door. I built the system in this house myself, wire by wire, camera by camera, with a redundancy nobody but me knew existed. I reached under my desk and found the small toggle switch I'd tucked behind a support beam years ago, more out of habit than expectation I'd ever need it. I flipped it. The corrupted display went dark, and a second screen woke up in its place, pulling instead from a separate hard drive I kept hidden in the crawl space beneath the house, wired independently, never connected to the home network, immune to anything that could reach it through the internet. I plugged in a small encrypted drive I always carried, entered my passcode, and the archive opened clean, untouched, every second of footage sitting exactly where I'd left it. I found the recording from 2 nights earlier, time-stamped just after 1 in the morning, my study door swinging open in grainy infrared, Vanessa and Craig slipping inside without a sound, moving like people who'd rehearsed this. Craig walked straight to the safe. No searching, no hesitation. He pulled a slip of paper from his pocket, dialed in the combination like he'd done it a dozen times, and lifted a small brass key from an envelope taped to the underside of the desk drawer, a hiding spot I genuinely believed only I knew. Vanessa stood beside him holding an empty tote bag, and as he handed her folder after folder, she loaded them in without a word, glancing occasionally toward the hallway, checking, watching, making sure her own father stayed asleep upstairs while they emptied out his life. I watched that footage twice. I made myself watch it twice, because I needed to be absolutely certain of what I was seeing before I let myself feel anything about it. My own daughter, standing in my study at 1 in the morning, stealing from the man who'd carried her on his shoulders through county fairs, who'd sat up all night with her through chemistry homework she swore she'd never understand, who'd walked her down an aisle and cried doing it. That daughter stood in my house in the dead of night with an empty bag, taking everything I'd built and calling it hers. The anger came in waves after that, and I let each wave move through me and pass rather than fighting it, because I needed my mind clear for what came next. I called a longtime friend, Marian Aldrich, an attorney I'd known since we served together on a community bank's board 20 years back, a woman sharp enough to make grown executives sweat and honest enough that I'd trust her with anything I owned. I told her everything. The check, the safe, the pills, the footage. She was quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment, and then she said, "Walter, we're going to need a forensic accountant, a medical toxicology report, and a very patient judge. Give me 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks stretched long and strange. I stayed in my house, kept up appearances, told the few neighbors who asked that Vanessa had simply relocated for Craig's work, smiled when I needed to smile. Meanwhile, Marian built a case, quietly, methodically, subpoenaing bank records that traced the rerouted mailing address straight to an address in Denver registered under Craig's name, pulling toxicology consultation reports, confirming the compound in that blister pack matched precisely what a laboratory found when I finally had my own blood work run, discreetly, through a doctor Marian trusted completely. The results came back clean within days of stopping whatever they'd been feeding me. No dementia, no cognitive decline, just a healthy 68-year-old man who'd been quietly poisoned by his own child for the better part of 2 months. The financial fraud alone was enough to bring in the district attorney's office. Identity theft, unauthorized account access, forgery on the healthcare power of attorney, since it turned out Craig had also drafted an amended version months back, one giving him sole financial authority, and forged my signature onto it, a signature Marian's expert dismantled in about 4 minutes on the stand. But it was the toxicology evidence, my own physician testifying under oath about exactly what that unlabeled sedative does to an aging body and an aging mind, that turned the case from a family financial dispute into something the state took seriously enough to pursue with everything they had. Craig took a plea rather than risk a trial. 8 years, with restitution ordered on every dollar traced back to accounts he'd touched. Vanessa's attorney fought harder, argued she'd been influenced, coerced even, by a husband she was too frightened and too financially dependent on to stand up to. I don't know how much of that was true and how much was strategy. Maybe some of both. In the end, she took a plea as well, 18 months and 5 years of probation, along with a restraining order keeping her 100 yards from me unless a court decides otherwise. I sat in that courtroom and watched my daughter's shoulders shake as the judge read the sentence, and something in me broke quietly even as another part of me sat perfectly still, certain, unmoving. My granddaughters, Ruby and Charlotte, 7 and 4 years old, are the piece of this I refuse to leave unresolved, the piece I would not let slip through the cracks the way children so often do in stories like mine. Marian helped me petition for guardianship the same week charges were filed, and a family court judge, after reviewing everything, granted it. The girls live with me now, in this same house, in the same rooms their mother grew up in. I've set up a trust in both their names that neither parent can touch, ever, regardless of what happens after their sentences end. Their college funds sit untouched and protected, and every Sunday, under strict court-supervised conditions, Vanessa gets 1 hour with her daughters in a family services office downtown, supervised, monitored, earned back 1 visit at a time rather than assumed as a right. I recovered most of the money, not all of it. Some had already moved through accounts. Marian's investigators are still untangling, but enough that the warehouse and the education trust and my own retirement stand secure. I made one decision with a portion of what came back that surprised even me. I donated $400,000 to a research foundation studying the very sedative Vanessa had used on me, funding a study into long-term cognitive effects on older patients exposed to it without medical supervision. There was something almost unbearably fitting about turning the exact tool of my own attempted destruction into something that might protect somebody else's father someday. I also made Marian's paralegal an offer she wasn't expecting. Denise Alvarez had worked 11 years helping Marian's firm untangle cases exactly like mine, cases involving elder exploitation, cases most people never hear about because the victims are too ashamed or too frightened to come forward. I offered to fund her through law school, full tuition, on one condition, that she specialize in elder financial protection law when she finished. She cried on the phone when I asked her. She starts in the fall. I'm 68 years old, and some mornings I still wake up before sunrise, out of habit more than necessity, and I stand at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the sky change color over my backyard, listening to Ruby and Charlotte still sleeping upstairs, safe, protected, mine to raise the rest of the way. The house is quieter than it used to be, quieter than when Vanessa and Craig filled it with their particular kind of noise, the kind that sounds like family right up until you learn what it actually was. I think about Eleanor most on these mornings. I think about what she'd say if she could see what her own daughter became. What she'd say about the choice I made to protect two little girls, even at the cost of the daughter she raised right alongside me. I believe she'd tell me I did the only thing a father could do. I believe she'd tell me that loving someone and protecting yourself from them were never supposed to be the same thing, and the hardest lesson of my life has been learning exactly where that line sits and refusing to blur it again, no matter whose face is asking me to. If there's anything I want you to take from all this, it's simple. Never take a pill handed to you by someone else without asking your own doctor first, no matter how much you love them, no matter how sincere their eyes look across your own kitchen counter. Keep your important documents somewhere nobody in your own house can quietly access. A lawyer's office, a bank vault, somewhere with a paper trail attached to every single visit. Trust your gut when something feels wrong, even if you can't yet explain why. And never, under any circumstances, let guilt or love or the fear of being alone talk you into signing away the ability to speak for yourself. Family is supposed to be the one place you never have to guard your back. When it isn't, when the people who are supposed to protect you decide instead that you're simply an obstacle standing between them and what they want, you owe it to yourself and to whoever else depends on you to build whatever wall keeps you safe. Blood is not a guarantee. It never was. It's just the beginning of a story, and every one of us gets to decide, eventually, how that story is going to end. If this reached you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me, honestly, has someone you trusted completely ever shown you a side of themselves you never saw coming? I want to hear it. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me your story, because I promise you, somebody reading these comments tonight needs to know they're not alone in this.